Leadership and Agile are not necessarily mutually inclusive. However, I believe that Agile needs to be a tool in the toolbox of leaders everywhere. My guest on this episode believes that Agile and leadership go firmly hand in hand. During this joint episode, my guest Jeff Dalton and I discuss the similarities and differences between leadership and Agile, what Agile is, the importance of trust in organizations, the future of organizational structures, and many more other topics between Agile and leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 78, Agile Leadership with Jeff Dalton. Welcome one, welcome all to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for coming out. Whether you are someone who's looking at making the jump to a leadership role, someone who wants to get settled in their new leadership capacity, or you're a seasoned leader just looking to expand on your knowledge, you've come to the right place, folks. Guests like Jeff Dalton and I, we are here to serve you, to expand your leadership and make you a better leader and to rid the world of the bosses out there. Because you know what? There's just way too many bosses out there. So today, I got a bit of a different episode. Slightly different. So Jeff and I were discussing being guests on each other's episodes, which is very common in the podcasting world, right? We both want to, one, get our message out, but two, find world-class guests and bring them on our shows. So instead of just doing two different podcast episodes, we decided to do a joint episode where we're going to discuss Agile and leadership and Agile leadership all together. So you're going to hear a bit about me, some things that you are used to hearing from me, but you're also going to hear from Jeff, and his audience is going to hear some things that they're used to hearing from him. It was definitely a neat and cool conversation, and the topic is definitely one of the day, right? Agile is on the up and up. It is definitely gaining in popularity everywhere, especially in big business corporations. Hopefully one day it can reach government, but it'll probably take a while. But nonetheless, it is definitely a great episode. Before I dive in and start talking about Jeff and who he is, I want to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by my upcoming Power Goals program. We're literally at the release of this episode days away from the launch of the Power Goals program. So if you are having difficulties in figuring out what goals are right for you, how about going about achieving your goals, planning your goals, getting past those roadblocks, executing with precision and intention. If you don't know how to properly reflect to make the best use of your time and to ensure that you're actually progressing in the right way, then this program, folks, is for you. I basically made this program myself, and you'll see in the program that I use myself as an example about how I go about achieving the goals that I set out for me, right from how I pick my goals all the way to how I ensure I stay on track. So if you're interested, just go to movingforwardleadership.com/power. And that's going to bring you to one of two places, depending on the time you listen to this podcast and when you punch in that link. It's either going to bring you to a mailing list when I'm going to inform you ahead of time, ahead of everybody else, when the Power Goals program is released, and you'll get first dibs at early bird pricing. Or if you really even want it, even more so, the coaching package, which are just a limited number of seats available for said package, you'll get first dibs at that. Okay? So again, that's movingforwardleadership.com/power. And if it is already launched by the time you type that address in your web browser, well, it's just going to bring you to the landing page for the program, and feel free to sign up. I can't wait to see you in there. I know you have a lot of great things in you, and let's just unlock that, shall we? Release the wolves, get that hunger fed for those goals that you have been dying to achieve for such a long time. And do not become a part of that 92% of the population who do not achieve their goals on a yearly basis. All right, enough of that. Let's move into the episode, shall we? Jeff and I, again, this is a joint episode, so it's a little bit different as I explain, but a little bit about Jeff before I hit play on our recording. He's a veteran technologist, IT leader. He started as a software developer, which is very common in the whole Agile space because Agile came out of the software world. He's been a chief technology executive, a VP of product development, director level, over 30 years at various corporations such as Ernst and Young, Electronic Data Systems, HP, Intellicorp, Polk, etc. He's also part of the AgileCxO. So as a consultant, he's a teacher, he's a leadership coach, he's worked with NASA, Boeing, Bose, L3 Communications, Fiat Chrysler, and the list just keeps going on. So obviously, Jeff knows what he's talking about. He's got the experience in the IT world where Agile's come from, but he's also gone out into the real world and implemented it in large bureaucratic organizations. You know, when you think of NASA, Boeing, General Motors, Ford, federal and state organizations, right? He is there implementing this concept in these large organizations. So it was a great time talking with Jeff, having our conversation, and no doubt you're going to learn a lot. So, ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Jeff Dalton discussing Agile leadership. Jeff, cool, man.
Hey, how you doing, Scott?
I'm good.
This is new territory for us, interviewing each other.
I know. So nowadays, I'm probably wondering what the heck's going on right now.
I was checking out your website and I noticed that we talk about a lot of the same things. So I thought, why not talk about them at the same time?
I know, right? It was funny, and I forget, one of your team members reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jeff, I'd love to get on your show." I'm like, "Yeah, and get on your show, and then you get on his." And the efficiency part of my brain just kicked in. Why don't we just let's do this efficient? Let's do it in an agile way. Let's just
That's right.
Let's just do one show and push that on both audiences. So here we are.
Yeah, no, it's cool. We're going to put this on our Agile Leadership podcast later in the week, and you're going to put it on yours. So that'll be great for both listeners.
Yeah, for sure. So, for my guys, why don't we take your perspective on what Agile is and run with it from there?
Sure. It's really interesting to me because, I have a career in software development, and of course, in the late 90s and early 2000, everybody was talking about Agile, and mostly development teams were doing it. It was all sort of cool, and everybody had a great time, and we built some great software and had some fun. But now it's gotten serious. Now it's gotten a lot bigger. Whole companies are adopting Agile. And it really made me rethink what Agile was. When I was a younger programmer, I thought Agile was Scrum, basically. Agile was doing iterations and doing, working with stories and, estimating with story points and doing all the stuff that I'm sure you know how it works. And then I realized, no, Agile is just a way of thinking about things. And it's a way of leading. So this idea of Agile leadership kind of started to percolate with me about 10 years ago. Actually wrote a book or two about it and came to find that Agile and self-organization were linked at the hip. They were joined at the hip, that you really can't have an Agile organization that doesn't have strong self-organization. And what does that take, right? So back, when we were starting out and starting to do this stuff, it was a little bit chaotic. Nobody was really sure what it meant. And a lot of it came down to leadership. Leaders didn't really know how to lead Agile teams. And that's because they themselves weren't Agile. So to me, an Agile leader is one who really understands what a self-organizing infrastructure looks like and knows how to operate it without creating their own impediments. And the key thing that Agile leaders need to worry about is how to build trust, right? The most important thing on an Agile team is trust, but it's not magical, right? Trust is something that, I mean, we always say, yeah, trust is earned. Okay, well, that's the same thing we learned in kindergarten, so that's cool. But it's not that simple at scale, right? So the big question is how do we get 500 people to trust each other and to trust leaders? And as it turns out, it requires a good deal of infrastructure and a good deal of leadership in order to make that happen. So to me, Agile is about operating an infrastructure of high trust and high transparency, regardless of framework or methodology or what techniques you use. Because to me, those things are really secondary tools and methodologies. Building an infrastructure of high trust and high transparency is really what Agile is all about.
I love that whole high trust thing, and I laughed at your whole thing about trust is earned because I absolutely despise that mentality.
Yeah, right.
Where my background, where I come from, trust has to be inherent, it has to be immediate, it has to be guaranteed.
Right.
Because I as we were just discussed before I hit record here, was that I'm an Army background. I have to literally trust the guys they were to left and right of me with my life, my actual life, and I love taking that mentality to organizations and saying, you know what, 99% of the world out there, 99% of the people out there, they want to do a good job. They want to go ahead and they want to reach the goals. They want to achieve everything you want to achieve. Trust first. Let them roll with it, and you'll be surprised at what they'll achieve. And,
well, let me ask you this, because you have a strong military background. What is it about your experience in the military that makes you be able to trust the minute you walk in the door? Because that's really pretty unique.
It's the common goal, right? And essentially in the military is the common goal. I'm going to be pretty blunt here, is to take the objective, i.e. you're destroying another force. And the other common goal is not to get killed. So right. when life and death is the common goal, that trust, that period of earning trust, that shortens really quick.
Sure. So how much does training play into that? Because you guys train like crazy, and all the friends of mine that are in the military always talk about, trusting the training and relying on the training. How big a part of it is that?
It's huge. It absolutely is. And basically what we're trying to achieve in training is automating in the person's brain actions to do on the event of something, so that you take away that whole need to think about it. So right. It's you're enabling reaction, and you're also you're closing that whole decision making process, right? You're shortening that because you've gone through it in training. You've gone through all the worst case scenarios in training. So now you've come up to a scenario in real life. It's not so bad anymore because you've done this before. There's certain things which are immediate in your brain. You go ahead, you act on those right away, and then you can go ahead and analyze the situation a bit further because you got a chance to breathe, and then start making your corrective actions as you need. So, yeah, we do train a bit like crazy, especially when we're preparing for operations. When I deployed to Canada or Afghanistan in 2009, we were on training for about 7 months, and I was doing exercises. In Canada, all over Canada, over in Germany with NATO over in Germany, before we deployed. So
it sounds like, one of the key elements of trust in your organization is that you trust that your fellow soldiers are as well trained as you and are as committed to the objective as you. You can count on the fact that they've been trained and they know how to do their job, I think, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we said the same thing. We were talking before we started about, one of my side hobbies is playing jazz and playing music. And, one of the things I learned in music long before I learned it in this business was that, the ability to improvise and the ability to, do creative things comes after the training. Right? It comes after the discipline and the precision and the rigor. Then I'm free, in the music world, I'm free to improvise and do really cool stuff after I've done all my practicing, after I've done all my learning, after I've taken all my lessons and training, and after I practice till I have it absolutely perfect, then I can step out and really do cool stuff, right? And a lot of people in our business in the agile space seem to miss that point a little bit. You see a lot of people, experimenting. Hey, we're going to learn by experimentation, and that's cool and everything, and we should do that. But we should get really good at trusting and being agile before we do that, right? So you see a lot of people experimenting so much that they completely lose sight of the trust and transparency and the collaboration. But they say, hey, we're being agile. We're learning as we're going, and we're experimenting. And that's cool to experiment, but you really have to have that basis in discipline, don't you?
No, that makes a whole lot of sense. I always say that trust is essentially the cornerstone of leadership, because if you can't trust your people, you can't really lead them. If they know that you don't trust them, they're not going to be willing to follow you as in-depthly as what you'd want them to. So trust is absolutely crucial.
Right. And so you work with people sometimes, you work with leadership teams. What are some of the things that you see with leaders that really kind of make you cringe, or really you kind of wish, man, we really need to help this guy? What are some of the things that you see sometimes?
So there's a couple of different common themes that go on, trust being one and control being the other, right? A lot of leaders that get there, and I'll take a step back in two different types of organizations. So the big corporate type ones, the guys are like, yes, I'm a leader. I finally got the promotion. I'm the director, blah, 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 blah. I finally made it. The other side is the entrepreneurs, the guys who are starting off their own businesses. They're now working their way up, and they've hired their first handful of people. On both of those cases, I find that the leaders have a really hard time actually letting go and delegating effectively and efficiently to the point that enables them to actually do their job. And I've been so blunt to some clients and look at them and say, who's doing your job? And they kind of shake their head and they stare at me and go, what do you mean? Like, you're worrying about this, you're worrying about that, you're doing this, you're doing that. You have those people for all those things. You need to be worried about the strategic vision, lining up the new resources, planning for the future, et cetera, et cetera. Who's doing that? Because you're doing everything else but those things. Right.
That's kind of what I was getting at with self-organization. One of the things, of course, it's very popular in Agile to say that people put on whatever hat it makes sense to wear at the time, and we do whatever we have to do to get the job done. But what I found is that, good, crisp understanding of roles and accountabilities is essential to strong self-organization. And everybody can share roles and accountabilities, and that's perfectly fine. But when a developer steps up to do testing, for instance, or steps up to do architecture work when that's not really their specialty, and they're filling in the holes and they're doing what they got to do to get the work done, sometimes they don't really understand what it takes to fulfill that role successfully, right?
Yeah.
So really, if you're going to have a self-organizing team that is committed to Agile values, that means that roles and accountabilities need to be defined really crisply so everybody understands them, and people need to be trained in what they are.
Yeah, no, and that whole training bit I always say is crucial, so that you want to be, as a leader, in my point of view, training people to take over for you, right? Because one day you will leave that organization, that role, whatever it is. And if you don't go ahead and train somebody to come in and step in for you, you've gone ahead and just dumped down the drain however many years you spent in that role and that job. And that training is crucial. And it's also crucial because it enables you to take a step back, take a step away. You enable your people to go ahead and delegate down to them the tasks that you want to achieve. You give them the training, the foundation to go ahead and do it. Now you can take a step back, look at the broader view of the organization, see what's coming down the pipeline, see the trends in the markets, see the trends in the world, and take actions at the strategic level, not worrying about the tactical level of getting a contract signed with a customer.
Yeah, you got me thinking about that when you mentioned, leaders need to be focusing on, leadership things and not operational things. And one of the things I've found is that leaders get sucked into the operations because people don't always know what their responsibilities are. And I remember when when my company I had a big company of my own, people would always call me and ask me lots of stuff. Can I do this? Can I do this? Should I do this? And I got really sucked into the operational details. So I went through a process of transforming to more of a self-organizing model. And all of a sudden I was able to focus on strategy and focus on the things I wanted to focus on. So I wonder if sometimes leaders, don't really know how to do that. They don't really know how to create that architecture so that people can be agile and be successful self-organizing. What have you seen around that in terms of leadership really understanding how to be agile?
It's funny you talk about that, because as soon as you were describing that, I had my last position pop in my mind and my mentality there. So my last role, I was a squadron commander, a logistics squadron commander of 200 soldiers.
Oh, wow.
It's broken into 3 distinctive troops, right? So I had a maintenance troop that took care of fixing stuff, a supply troop that did supply things, and a transport troop that transported stuff. And that was basically my lines. And I said, okay, guys, if something is a supply problem and a supply problem only, I don't care. That's not my problem. That is you, the troop commander. That's your problem. Right. But now if I got a problem that, spans both supply and transport, for example, or supply and maintenance, well, now it's my problem because it's across those lines, right? And then I start worrying about those types of problems. And I explained that to my people. And I told them to push that even down further, all the way down. Use that mentality all the way down. And then you're enabling everybody to just take care of their own pieces of the pie.
Right. It actually frees up leaders to do more of the things leaders are supposed to do, doesn't it?
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
My friends, they'd be like, oh, I'm so run over with email. I get like 130 a day. Yeah. I may get 15.
Yeah. Right. No, you're absolutely right.
Right. And I was totally free. I was worrying about bigger projects, bigger things. I was, and not advantages, but opportunities came to me in my unit because I was actually prepared for them. So I was able to go ahead and forecast what equipment we would want down the line. And when budget opened up, well, guess what? Boom, I was ready to roll. So I ended up overspending by something like $500,000 my final year there because I was ready to roll. All the planning was done. We had the files ready to go. And as soon as budgets open up, like, okay, so we have X number of dollars available. What do you got? I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to roll with this project here, boss.
So they didn't expect you to be ready to spend all that money, but you fooled them on that one.
Oh, yeah. We took care of, I shouldn't say burning money. We took care of efficiently, spending money on operational requirements for sure.
They were looking for somebody to help them spend it, probably.
But it just shows though, right? That's the impact. All suddenly, because if I was worried about all the grassroots stuff, all the base level stuff, not to say that's not important, but it's not my role. It's what, the guys at the ground level, it's their role. So I'm supposed to be worried about the strategic level. That is the strategic level. Having the files ready to roll so that when opportunity arises, I can launch on it and then increase the operational capability of my organization. That is my role.
I heard a guy say something the other day that stuck with me. He said, if you're always prepared, you never have to get ready. So it sounds like you were prepared to submit that documentation so you could get that budget going before anybody else.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was a Rottweiler on a porterhouse steak.
That's great. So one of the things you just said about, if it's cross-organizational, that was kind of your problem, yours to deal with. In a non-military setting, in an agile setting, we're seeing, let me back up a second. One of the reasons I wrote the book was because a lot of the clients I'd been working with over the years were big companies, General Motors and Chrysler and the DoD and people like that here in the U.S. And they're all wanting to be agile, putting quotes up. Your listeners can't hear that, but they're, the DoD said yesterday, every project of ours is an agile project. Now, set aside, we can talk about whether they know what they mean when they say the word agile. They probably don't. But it seems like the large organizations are the ones that are really getting a lot of press these days. And I'm wondering what kinds of issues you're seeing with large companies and how they communicate with each other when it gets to that cross-functional team communications.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what we see is a lot of stovepiping, right? The marketing guys just talking to the marketing guys. The R&D guys just talking to R&D guys. The sales guys are only talking to the sales guys. And what they're missing is that cross-pollination of the teams. And sometimes it's because the people in the senior roles are like, it's my team. They hold on to the team, don't allow the team to exit that stovepipe. And all of a sudden you got different messaging on the exact same product or exact same service. And it's like, oh, you're telling me one thing, your website says another, and the guy on the phone told me something completely different. Well, how is the customer or potential customer supposed to react to that? I'm like, wow, shag it. I'll go somewhere where it actually makes sense.
Right. Well, and we see people holding on to their dominions as well, right?
Yeah, little empires, right?
Right. So how do you break through that? I mean, you're talking some really good stuff here. I've written some really good stuff. Older guys tell me, yeah, that's the same stuff we've been telling them for many years. Don't be stovepipe. I can't, I don't know how old you are exactly, but you probably remember pushing responsibility down was really big in the early 80s, and everybody talked about that. What's different? What's going on here that's different about Agile? Because it feels very different than the kinds of things we were doing in the 80s and 90s to try to get organizations to perform better.
Yeah, from my experience, from my context, to break those whole little empires and stuff like that, it takes a really strong leader to walk in and essentially break it up.
Right.
And essentially you got to take the bull by the horns and force people's hands to break up those empires, identify them and break them up. And sometimes, you know what, the easiest way to do that from my context is do it in informal settings. Bring people out, grab people from the different departments and teams and stuff like that, and go out for lunch and put down one main rule: no shop talk. And force people to connect on that personal level, because what happens is when people connect on that personal level, they're going to build the relationships, and then they're going to immediately start trusting each other. And once that occurs at a personal level, of course it's going to spew into the professional realm, right? And then suddenly they're like, oh, Joe at marketing, you can't trust him. Like, what? No, I know Joe. Our kids are now playing together. Heck yeah, you can trust Joe and what he has to say at the marketing department. And then you slowly start breaking those walls down. But it takes a lot of effort, and you have to be almost ironclad about it, like walking in and saying, no, we're not going to have it that way. And it was much like how when I walked in my squadron, people are like, oh, so I heard this might be going on. I'm like, is that rumor or fact? They're like, oh, kind of rumor. I'm like, I don't want to hear about it. I don't care. Talk to me when you actually got something, right?
So the idea of Agile coach is an interesting idea, and you hear this with a lot of development teams, that they bring in Agile coaches to get started, to help with their transformation, if they want to call it that. We can dig into whether that's a good idea even at all, but they bring in Agile coaches to work with the teams and help remind them of the way to make this work successfully. What do you think of the idea of extending that Agile coach idea to the C-suite, to the higher level, the directors, the VPs, the CEOs of the company? Do you think they need Agile coaching just like development teams do?
I think I'll summarize my thought with a statement. The day you stop learning is the day you become useless in your organization.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that goes hand in hand with being coach, whether that's being an Agile coach or that's like a leadership coach, like what I do. It doesn't matter as long as you're seeking to expand your knowledge, is seeking to have someone hold up that mirror to you and say, hey, what the heck are you doing? Then yes, it needs to be expanded in there. You can't think that you always have all the answers.
Right.
Because when you do, then you get what we like to refer to as tunnel vision. Tunnel vision, that whole ideology comes from looking down the scope of a rifle. So you only get to see what the scope sees. Well, guess what? There's things to the left and right of the scope. And if you don't see the entire picture, then you're going to be in trouble, right? So no, the C-suite guys definitely, directors, whatever senior level or leadership there is within an organization, they still need to be talking to people. They still need to be learning. They still need to have someone to say, hey, have you thought about this, or have you looked at that? Someone that's objective, that isn't necessarily especially not necessarily emotionally invested in the organization, because you see that a lot with those family corporations, those ones that big family ones, because their name is literally on the side of the building, right?
Yeah.
So they're heavily emotional because it's their family's name. When someone who's not as emotionally connected to it walks in and can play devil's advocate, can clear away the fog, can hold up a mirror and say, what the heck are you guys thinking? You should be doing it this way, not that way, for the following reasons. It's crucial. Like, it's absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I've actually spent some time working for some family-owned companies, some big ones. And the other thing I found is the informal lines of power and communications are pretty substantial. And it isn't, family and friends, because family organizations tend to have a lot of friends working for them because they started out that way, right? And one company I'm thinking of, I was CIO of their company for a while, and you could work the line of communication, the chain of command, but things never went that way. Things always went around the chain of command. So even sometimes the tester or the admin or, somebody down in the mailroom would say, well, I'm going to go talk to, my buddy Joe, who happens to be the president and CEO of the company, in order to get things changed. So it really adds a layer of complexity when you're working with a large company. But I want to get back to something you said a minute ago. I was asking you about agile coaches, and then you said, leadership coaches. So you kind of differentiated there, and I really liked that. Because we're trying to make leaders more agile, but isn't really agile in the sense that development teams are agile, is it? It's quite a bit different.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, right, agile is one of the tools in the toolbox that leaders can employ. We both have a common buddy, right, Chris Williams, and Chris always says, agile isn't necessarily the solution for every situation. So in my mind, as a leader, you need to have that tool in the toolbox. Realize when it's good to use it, when it's not good to use it. Does it pertain to a certain situation or not? So that's why I kind of differentiate the two, and look at it, right? So, because there could be a number of different options you could have. You have increasing efficiency to an organization, increasing effectiveness to an organization. You just need to reorganize things. These are all different leadership avenues that you can go down and apply. Agile is just another one of those, right? In my mind. I'm not sure what you think of that.
Well, I mean, I agree with you in that, agile is a pretty broad subject. And if you consider the rather narrow definition I gave you at the very beginning, that it's about trust and transparency, I think that applies to any kind of framework or methodology or approach. So I think if we define agile as being a high trust, transparent framework for operations, I think it probably applies everywhere, right? But of course, agile is very broad, or at least in our industry, people think of it as very broad. Some people call it a software methodology. Some people call it a framework. It's neither of those things in my view, but it is fairly broad. So this idea of applying, that sort of fundamental nature of agility is, to me, is fundamental to any kind of leadership coaching as well. Do you agree with that?
No, I totally agree with it. And always my style of leadership is definitely more in line with agile and agile principles. I'd sooner make decisions and then adjust as we go along than wait for all the information to necessarily come in, and then go ahead and make the decision, because by the time you actually get all the information, it may be too late. So I always prefer a decision made on a 80% solution is always better early or on time than the 100% solution late, right?
Right.
You can always of course, adjust for that 20%, making those minor changes. And a lot of our military leadership training that we go through and talking with Chris and reading up on Agile, you know what? It's very in line with Agile methodology and Agile thinking, making those minor course corrections, tell them what your vision, your intent is, letting people go out, figuring it out on their own, coming back to you with questions as needed, and then providing them the resources to achieve the objective.
Yeah, I think I was asking you before about what's different now in the, in the culture where you're seeing all of these folks from you to me to Dove Barron to Jim Bouchard. I don't know if you know those guys. They do podcasts too. They're pretty sizable names out there. They all talk about agility. They're all talking about command and control is dead. Agility is where it's at. Self-organization. And a lot of us are talking about this. And I asked you before, what's different now? Because we've been talking about re-engineering organizations for decades, or 50 years probably, since the day they were created. And it seems like one of the things the Agile community's done that's interesting in this space is they've created frameworks for this sort of thing, frameworks for this sort of thinking, what I call values-based frameworks.
Yep.
So like if you look at the Agile Manifesto is kind of interesting because it's like the core of agility is defined in the Agile Manifesto and the principles that are set forth in there. And then everything sort of grew out around that, right? So it's like, okay, you can have a framework, you can have a methodology if you want, but it's got to tie and trace directly to these core values. And that's something very different than what we've seen around, operational methodologies in the past. If you look at if you look at RUP or any kind of the management frameworks that are out there, or any kind of software development frameworks that are out there, none of them really tie to values and belief systems. And it seems like the Agile folks have really done an interesting thing and helped us out here by creating this sort of central repository of behaviors and values that everything else has to tie to. Seems to me that's quite a bit different than what we've seen in the past.
You said one thing interesting there a little while ago, and that was that some guys believe that command and control is essentially dead. And I'm like, I kind of cringe at that whole thought process. I'm like, well, then who's running the vision of our organization? Who's providing the prioritization? Who's doing all of that, I cringe when I say management, but for everybody's sake, managerial style activities, right? Because someone has to do that. Someone has to decide which project is more important than the other one. Someone has to decide where to divert resources and look towards the future. So you can't necessarily say, oh, command and control is dead. Is command and control changing? Absolutely. I've been reading all kinds of articles. I forget the name of the company now because it's been quite some time since I read an article that the company, around 80 people or something like that, got rid of all management positions, less one, the owner.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Zappos.
Might be.
Shoe company. They have a book out about it right now.
Right. Anyway, got rid of all those positions except for one. And it's like, well, there's still command and control. That person is still providing vision. They're still providing the prioritization. They're still allocating resources. It's just that now the team isn't inundated with the depth of leadership that's ongoing. So,
yeah, it seems like a formalization of the flat organization argument, right? We're going to get rid of all these layers of management, create crystal clear roles and accountabilities, and basically have one layer of management, the owner or the senior managers. It sounds like what they're doing there. Yeah.
And I would say that works for some organizations. It doesn't work for all, right? And one of the things that a lot of people ask me is one of the big questions I get is like, what's the best leadership style? I'm like, well, there isn't one.
Right, yeah.
It
depends.
It depends on the situation. So you have to change your style based off the situation in front of you. Organizations are the same way. You can't say, oh, which organizational theory construct is the best? Is it stovepipe? Is it cross-functional teams? Is it flat? Is it deep? Well, you know what? It depends on what a number of factors, the type of services or products that you provide, the actual geographical span of your organization, et cetera. There's so many factors to play. So you can't necessarily say, oh, this is the way it has to be done now. Again, it goes back to, this is just another option for you to pick out of your toolbox or whatever the heck you want. You're carrying around your rucksack and you implement at that given moment.
Yeah, one of the chapters in my book is titled Agile Requires Strong Leadership, Just Not the Kind You're Used to.
Yeah, I like that.
It's like, and part of the problem is I don't know if you follow English history at all. I'm kind of a history nut, but in Britain, there was a prime minister by the name of Benjamin Disraeli, and he's famously quoted, during a discussion about letting more people into the House of Commons, he said, "I've climbed up upon a greasy pole, and I'm not getting down." And I use that expression in a lot of my conference speeches, because the idea that the kind of skills that are required to move up in an organization, to become a CEO or a VP or a senior manager, are antithetical to the skills we need today for leadership, right? The idea that you get there by being competitive and by being controlling and by taking advantage, as opposed to getting there by building up the people around you, nurturing your organization, teaching them and training them and helping them succeed. You don't get promoted when you do that very much these days. Yeah, you should, right?
You should. And it's sad to say that I see that in my organization as well. People who just basically bully their way all the way up through the rank system. And it's just like, no, that's not the way it should be. And a lot of it I find is out of fear. A lot of people, especially in the civilian world, if I build my subordinate Joe up, now he's going to compete for my job and I could get myself fired. And so they kind of, knock them down in self-preservation, whereas, or they don't want them to leave. So they don't want to build them up and get experience, so that they basically, Joe gets the exact same job I have, but in a different organization. Mm-hmm. My viewpoint of that is, well, if that happens, if you build him up and he goes to a different organization, heck, it could be a competitor. But if he says you're the greatest boss he's ever had, regardless of the situation, you have a friend in court.
Right. You're absolutely right. I remember when I was a young consultant, I was working for one of the big consulting firms back in the 90s, and hired a whole team of folks to do a massive project. Very junior people. I was what they call a senior manager in that company. And by the end of 3 years, every single person that I hired was a senior manager. And every one of them moved up very quickly and took on a lot of responsibility. And my leader said, "Hey, Jeff, we don't need you in this role anymore, because you've basically gotten everybody promoted around you. We're going to send you off to do this again somewhere else." But that sort of thinking was unique. I mean, that sort of, and wasn't thought of as good at the time, actually, by lots of people. You're right. I think people are intimidated by it, and we kind of let the what I call the bullies sometimes, we let them move up quicker than they should.
Absolutely. I refer to them as bosses, right? And my tagline is "Stop bossing, start leading."
That's a good one.
You like that? Yeah, I enjoy it. It's fairly new, so that the reception is definitely warm. Anyway, I always refer to them as bosses, and as soon as I say that, everybody's got a good picture of what the boss in their mind. Right. We don't need that. We don't have. The world moves so fast today. Things change so quickly. Like, things might have changed since we got on this podcast. We don't know until we get off and actually fire up our phones or check the news, and you never know what could have changed. But the world changes at such a fast rate that you can't be that power hungry, controlling, back case that every decision has to be made by you. Because as soon as you do that, you're bottlenecking everything to you. And when you're not available, everything just grinds to a halt.
No, I hear you. When we changed my company to more of a self-organizing, flatter organization, I enjoyed not making decisions. I enjoyed not being the one that everybody came to. I enjoyed not saying anything in meetings, and letting people, make their own points and make their own arguments. So I think leaders just really need to chill out a tiny bit and really learn to enjoy the fact that they're really not needed to make every decision, because then you get to focus on the cool stuff, right?
Absolutely. I always say, if you love something, let it go. So if you love that power of, the feeling of being on a leadership role, let it go, push it down, go ahead. Right. If it's a decision, I always ask myself, is this a decision I absolutely have to make? Right. Is there something that, and again, in the Army context, we're very hand-tied with various policies and laws and all that jazz. So is there something policy procedure-wise that forces me to make it so that I make this decision? Is there, something along the lines which I've set up myself that says I have to make this decision? If the answers like those are no, then why the heck are you making that decision?
No, that's good. I like that. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know your listeners know all about you. You've been talking to them for a long time, but our listeners don't know who you are at all. And I'm just kind of curious, obviously a military guy, been around doing it for a lot of years. Tell me what made you say, hey, I really want to become focused on leadership and I really want to do this podcast. Tell me how that all came about.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a little story, but I'll dive in and indulge you a little bit. So I joined the Canadian Forces in 2001 and went to the Royal Military College of Canada. So it's kind of equivalent to West Point, Annapolis, and Annapolis Valley and places like that in the States. Graduated in 2006 and got posted to Edmonton, Alberta, 1 Service Battalion. So around 24 years of age, I was actually commanding 84 soldiers in my transport.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Talk about trial by fire. As I already said, in 2009, I deployed to Kandahar in Afghanistan. However, my mission there was a little different than most people's missions. So I was in a different type of unit we refer to as the Operational Mentoring and Liaison Team. And our mission, our mandate was to literally embed ourselves with the Afghan National Army units and provide mentorship and the liaison between them and the coalition forces. So if they needed support while on operations, we were the ones that were able to bring that in. So, medevac helo, for example, artillery support, fast air, et cetera, we're able to call those assets in during operations to help them. So that kind of started, I would say, ingrained the seed in developing moving forward leadership. So coming back out of Afghanistan, lo and behold, I get a posting that we refer to as a posting message, and I'm moving to Borden, Ontario, to the Logistics Training Center. And, so you start seeing the role, right? Start teaching young officers, being in charge of young troops and saying, hey, I like this whole training and mentoring thing. And then my wife did a career change, so she was crazy busy with school, and I just needed something to keep myself basically occupied at nighttime so I didn't get in trouble.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, there were a couple of other failed leadership attempts at various things before that. But I said, I enjoyed podcasting. I was doing a podcast on another subject with another group. I said, why don't I try leadership podcasting? Just as something to, just as an outlet. And then that literally just morphed. Once you start a podcast, you're like, oh, well, I need to be able to get it out. So I started a Twitter handle, and then I started a website, and then I started a Facebook group. And all of a sudden, now I'm offering services and getting ready to launch my first online course over the span of almost 3 years.
Nice. And so you were saying earlier, you actually do this frequently, more than once a week sometimes. So you've got a lot of different people on your list.
Yeah. So I push out 2 podcast episodes a week. Mondays being my Monday Leadership Minute, which is literally between 3 and 5 minutes long of whatever topics either on my head or someone reaches out to me saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this? So I'll do up a quick chat with this, and then shows like this one will go out Wednesdays, the full-blown show. Or I also do my own solo episodes as well on Wednesdays.
Very cool. Yeah, we started the Agile Leadership podcast about 2 years ago because we really wanted to give leaders an understanding of what it was like to lead a transparent and collaborative and high trust organization. And we started with CIOs from state governments. So we interviewed a couple of dozen CIOs from state government. We really wanted to know where they were at. And they were all talking about, trying to be more agile and try to really embrace agile. And you might be surprised that the government CIOs are really interested in agile. We definitely were. And so it's kind of moved from one thing to another. And so, yeah, the podcasting thing, we're really having fun with it. It looks like you are too.
Oh, it's such a great medium. I think it's probably it's one of the best mediums out there, right? Because you go ahead, you say you control it. I control Moving Forward Leadership podcast, what content goes out, when it goes out, etc. But the best part is it enables people to listen to it at their own whim, right? Guys can go ahead and log on my website, but they can also download it to whatever device they use and listen to it that way when they feel like it. Maybe they're listen to it on a commute, maybe while they're at work, maybe while they're doing some gardening. I don't know. But all I know is there are like thousands of people out there listening to me. And when I go ahead and throw up the map of the downloads and stuff, my mind gets blown. Like, holy crap, there's people in India, Japan, Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, North America, of course, that are listening to me talk about leadership.
Wow.
It's like, it's really neat.
So what's next for you? You said a course, and is there a book in your future? What are you thinking about?
Yeah. So, I am getting ready to launch, what I refer to as the Power Goals program. So this is a individual thing. It's not necessarily, well, it is leadership in my mind, but it's not centric around leadership. One of my big things is that in order to lead people, you first have to be able to lead yourself, right? And how do we lead ourselves is by achieving things in our life that we want to achieve, goals and goal setting. So I've developed what I refer to as the Power Goal program. Power Goals it's a podcast, the episode that I pushed out, 61 off the top of my head. And it's a program. It's a 5-step program on how to achieve goals and not even SMART type goals, but any type of goal. And I use myself as an example. I went through a little rough patch in my life and I wasn't happy with things. And, and it was just like in the SMART world, that wouldn't be to become happy wouldn't be a valid goal. Like, how the hell is that not a valid goal?
Right? Yeah.
But in the SMART context, it wouldn't be. So it's like, okay, SMART doesn't work here. I have to find something that works. I search. Couldn't find anything that works. When you can't find something, what do? You make it. So I went out and I made it. Now I'm getting ready in just over a week now. The 15th of May, I'm going to launch the Power Goals program. So if people are listening to this, are interested, just go to movingforwardleadership.com/power. And if it's before 15 May, you're going to be sent to a mail list sign up that will allow you to get info on the program when it goes live. And it's 15 May or after, you're going to be brought to the landing page for it.
Nice, man. That's exciting. You got a lot of cool things coming up.
Yeah. So that is hopefully one of, I believe, 3 different online programs I plan on creating down the line. Now, my biggest limiting factor is that this is my side hustle. I'm doing this on my spare time in the evenings and sometimes mornings, right? Because I work full day because I'm still active Army. Yeah. And the biggest hurdle I have to sort out starts on the 21st of August when I actually go down the road to Toronto to the Canadian Forces College to start what we refer to as the Joint Command and Staff program. So it's a master's program for 10 months.
Wow.
So I'm going to be working that, and I'm going to be working. I 100% am dedicated to Moving Forward Leadership, and I'm going to be working on that as well. So I just got to see how that balance winds out.
No, excellent, man. I'd be interested to hear how your podcast changed after you've been through that.
Yeah, I think in a little foreshadowing, I think probably what's going to happen is I'll end up doing more solo shows than interview shows, just because I'll have more. As you know, as a podcaster and interviews, sometimes they're huge headaches to get organized. Surprising we were able to sort out this one in the first shot, boom, done. But that's often not the case, right? It's like, reschedule, cancel, reschedule, going through, lining them up. And when you don't own your own schedule, it's really difficult to go and do that. So I believe for those 10 months, it'll be mainly solo episodes from myself. But if I can get the interviews in, I'll still get the interviews in, right? Because I am still committed to the team out there, the listeners out there, and helping them with their journey.
Well, one hint I can give you is have an assistant that manages your calendar. That makes scheduling these things a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely on the line.
I know. I've had a great one for a few years. Unfortunately, she's heading out west to California with her husband and is leaving us. But I know we're just about out of time, so I wanted to ask you just quickly two things. What's one thing that makes you look at a leader and say, man, that person is just a gifted, fabulous leader? Like what's one trait that you see? And then what's one trait that you're just shaking your head saying, man, that person is just never going to make it as a leader? What are those two things?
I'm going to say they're the exact same thing. And that is communication.
Oh, okay.
Right. So when you get a good leader that stands up in front of everybody and can communicate things articulately and explain things and change the tone of the message, keeping the same goal of the message, but changing the tone based off of the audience that's in front of them, that to me is the game changer. Now, on the other end of that spectrum is when you have someone, when you walk in their office, you don't know what you're going to get as a communication strategy. They may be happy, go lucky, one point of the day, and absolutely raging mad for no reason, apparent reason, the other part of the day. And you're just like shaking your head, like, how can you operate? So
interesting. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree on the communications. Yeah, that's so important. I was going to say that the two things that I see are, or that I notice are, humility is one character trait that I really like to see in a great leader. I always say to my kids, the great leaders, the really successful people in this world, have a level of humility that it really shows, when you interact with them. Because they're not worried about impressing anybody anymore. They're not worried about moving up. They're not worried about fighting that fight. And the opposite of that is arrogance, that I see that, shaking my head like that person just isn't going to be a great leader. They're just way too interested in themselves. But I think both of those things come out in the communications.
Absolutely. I was literally just thinking that myself. Yeah. I totally agree with you, the humility thing and the arrogance thing. So I always end my show, one last question, my guess.
Sure.
And that is, to you, Jeff Dalton, what makes a great leader?
I think, to me, what makes a great leader is a person who has a great deal of discipline and precision in their understanding of the subject and applies that with great humility and great compassion for the people that work for them. So in other words, someone that is truly an expert in their field, beyond any other experts, but also applies that knowledge with both humility and compassion for the people around them.
Yeah, I love that too. Jeff, man, it's been great.
Really, man.
For my audience out there, how can they reach out to you, get in touch with you, find your podcast?
Well, that's great. So you can reach out to me and find our podcast at AgileCxO.org. AgileCxO.org has our podcast, and we also have information there about large-scale agility and self-organization and helping run your company. And if you're really interested in hearing about some of the things we talked about, you can go to Amazon and buy my book. It's called Great Big Agile, an Operating System for Agile Leaders. If you love the book, please leave me a good rating. And if you don't like it, just pretend you never bought it.
I love it.
So, yeah, Amazon.com is also a good place to find out what I'm thinking. So, thanks a lot, man. That's cool.
Yeah, no, definitely appreciate it. And I guess for your audience, if they feel like reaching out to me, just go to movingforleadership.com, and that's where the podcast is hosted. You can subscribe via movingforleadership.com/subscribe. And as well, for your audience, free gift. Well, heck, my audience too, if they're listening. Anyway, free gift for the listeners out there. Just go to movingforleadership.com/download, and you get a free two chapters of my ebook, The 9 Foundation of Leadership.
Oh, fabulous. Are you gonna move that to a printed book anytime soon?
No, that one's going to stay ebook. I do believe I do have a book in the back of my mind. I'm not going to let too much out about it because I'm doing it, piecemeal basically. So, as I gain enough experience, I add in a chapter, but I definitely foresee by the time I retire from the Canadian Forces, a book being released with Scott McCarthy as the author. talking about leadership for sure. But that's TBD.
TBD, man. All right, Scott. Well, it was really cool chatting with you, man. And I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you coming on our show as well.
Hey, absolutely. It goes both ways, my friend. Take care.
All right, man. Take care. Talk to you soon.
So I hope everyone enjoyed that episode there with Jeff and I. A little different, but hey, it's great to change things up from time to time, right? You can't have the same old interview episode every single week because you would get bored. I would get bored. Heck, everybody would get bored, right? A little different. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And remember, if you did enjoy it, if you truly connected with this episode, if you connect with the podcast, with me, my message, my vision, my mission to rid the world of bosses and grow and inspire and help leaders out there, then remember R squared, S squared. Rate and review the show so that more people can know about moving forward leadership, what we're achieving here, what our goals and objectives are, and we're going to reach more leaders to rid the world of more bosses. Finally, subscribe. Go to movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And then finally, share. Share this episode with someone who you think could use the message of the episode. And be sure to tag me in any form of social media, really. Hunt me down and tag Moving Forward Leadership so that we know and that person knows where they can go for more information. Well, that's all I got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.